The house was eerily still. I remember that night like it was yesterday. I walked through the door, thinking it was going to be just another evening like any other. But it wasn't. Something felt off. The weight of the silence pressed down on me the moment I stepped inside. Rachel wasn't in the living room, nor was she in the kitchen. Usually, when I came home, I'd find her sitting on the couch, watching her favorite shows or scrolling through her phone. But tonight? Nothing. My footsteps echoed down the hallway as I made my way toward the bedroom, and that's when I saw it, her phone, resting casually on the kitchen counter. The screen was unlocked. A flicker of hesitation ran through me, but it was brief. Too brief. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. I grabbed the phone, holding it as if it might burn me. For a moment, I wondered why I even cared. Rachel and I had been together for years, and we shared everything. But the truth is, I knew something was wrong. Deep down, I could feel it in my bones, in the way she'd started pulling away, the late nights, the secretive glances. The phone was still warm from her touch. Without even thinking, I began scrolling. At first, it seemed innocent. Just some pictures of her with friends, family gatherings, nothing to worry about. But then, I scrolled further. There it was, a folder labeled private. My stomach twisted. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. I hesitated for a second before tapping the folder. What was I hoping to find? A hidden treasure? A secret confession? I couldn't even tell myself that. I just needed to know. I opened it. The first image was a selfie of Rachel, but it wasn't a regular selfie. She was lying on a bed, her hair messy, her eyes half closed. The lighting was soft, almost romantic. She wasn't looking at the camera directly, but the way she positioned herself made it clear she was posing for someone. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced at the next image, and the next. Each one more intimate than the last. Her body, revealed in ways I'd never seen before, deliberately posed, like she was giving herself to someone. I zoomed in on one photo. It was blurry, but there was no mistaking the man in it. David. My mind couldn't process it at first. The man who'd become a close friend of hers over the last year. The man I'd welcomed into our home, shared meals with, laughed with. And there he was, his arm draped around her waist, his hand sliding up her thigh. I didn't need to see the rest of the images to know where this was going. My pulse was racing, my hands shaking. The folder didn't just have pictures, it had videos too. I hesitated but played one. It was grainy, but there was no mistaking their faces. Rachel, in a hotel room, laughing and talking with David. But the laughter wasn't playful. It was the kind of laughter that happens when two people share something deeper, something secret. She whispered something I couldn't hear clearly, but I caught the glint in her eyes. It wasn't me she was looking at when she smiled like that. I couldn't look away. The phone felt heavy in my hands, like it was burning me, each image more damning than the last. There was no denying it now. Rachel was having an affair, a full-blown affair with someone I considered a friend. My mind raced to the implications. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I seen the signs sooner? The moments where she would pull away when I reached out, the way she'd laugh a little too long at David's jokes, the late nights she claimed were for work when I knew she had a lighter schedule. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated. She had hidden these images for a reason, tucked away in a place I'd never think to look. She didn't just hide them from me. She hid them from herself. I felt something in my chest twist. It wasn't just anger. It was disbelief. How had we gotten here? I sat down at the kitchen table, the phone still in my hands, the images flashing in my mind like a slideshow I couldn't stop. I should have confronted her then, right then, but I couldn't. Part of me still wanted to believe it was a mistake, a temporary lapse in judgment. I kept telling myself that maybe, just maybe, this was something that could be explained away. But I knew better now. The truth had been staring me in the face the whole time. Rachel's footsteps echoed through the hall, and I snapped out of my trance. I hadn't even heard her come in. She appeared in the doorway, looking at me, her eyes widening when she saw the phone in my hands. I couldn't look at her, not yet, not until I had answers. I didn't trust myself to speak. The words were there, caught in my throat. Questions, accusations, the need for an explanation. But I couldn't bring myself to say them yet. Rachel, standing there frozen, tried to read my face. Her eyes flickered from the phone to me, panic rising. I didn't know what I was expecting. Her to break down? To beg for forgiveness? But she didn't. She just stood there, silent, almost resigned. Her lips trembled as if she was debating whether or not to lie. But I didn't want the lie. I wanted the truth. No more pretending. No more excuses. Her voice broke the silence. Alex, I can explain. I didn't let her finish. I dropped the phone onto the table with a loud thud. I didn't know what I wanted in that moment. Revenge? The truth? Part of me just wanted to burn everything down, to make her feel the same devastation I was drowning in. But I was paralyzed by the truth, and the reality was starting to set in. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This wasn't my wife anymore. And the worst part? I had no idea what came next. Before we continue, did you know 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet? If you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to leave a comment below. I sat there in the kitchen, frozen with the phone still lying in front of me like some twisted trophy of betrayal. The images, the videos, they were all still vivid in my mind. But there was something else, something deeper that I couldn't ignore. A voice inside of me kept repeating the same thing over and over. How did it come to this? Rachel's words echoed in my head as she stood there, eyes wide, lips trembling. She hadn't said much, just those 3 words, I can't explain. But I didn't need her explanation. Not anymore. What was left to say? The proof was right there, in black and white on that phone screen. I looked up at her, and I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Or was it just disbelief? Because this couldn't possibly be real. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to us. To understand how we got here, I need to take you back. Back to when Rachel and I first met. Back to when things were easy. It was years ago, long before I ever imagined that I'd be sitting in my kitchen, holding the phone that would unravel my entire life. Back then, Rachel was my world. The first time I laid eyes on her, I was struck by how effortless she made everything seem. She was confident, beautiful, and had this ability to make everyone around her feel like they were the most important person in the room. I couldn't help but admire her. We met at a college party. I'd been on the sidelines, as usual, always the observer, never the one in the spotlight. But Rachel, she was the star. She had this energy about her that drew people in. When I spoke to her that night, I don't think I even realized how special it was. But she listened, really listened, and laughed at my terrible jokes in a way that made me feel like I had just cracked the code to something magical. We started dating not long after that night. Our connection was undeniable, at least, that's how it felt at the time. Everything was perfect. I thought we were 2 halves of a whole. We moved in together after 6 months of dating, and life felt like it was on a steady track. It wasn't like some whirlwind romance, but it didn't need to be. We were comfortable. We laughed together, traveled together, built a life. Rachel would wake up early to make coffee before work, and I would complain about how early it was, but still, we'd sit at the kitchen table together, laughing over half-sleepy conversations. Our apartment was small, but it was ours, and that's all that mattered. That was the foundation. The early days. The days I could look back on and convince myself everything was perfect. But now I could see the cracks in the walls that I had ignored. She used to tell me everything. Every little detail about her day, about her thoughts, about her fears. We shared it all. But slowly, those conversations became less frequent. The little things she used to do, the touches, the glances, they all faded. I remember the first time I noticed her pulling away. It wasn't obvious at first. I'm not sure why, but I could tell something had shifted. It wasn't one big moment. No loud argument or dramatic fight. It was the small things. A missed text here, a late night there. But when you add it all up, it becomes something much bigger than you can ignore. I didn't want to face it. I thought I was just being paranoid. Then came David. At first, he seemed harmless enough. Just another one of her coworkers. He was friendly, talkative, easy to get along with. They'd often talk about work over dinner, and at first, I didn't think much of it. But as the weeks passed, I started noticing the little things. She would come home late from work, later than usual, and I would hear about David again. He'd offer to drive her home when it rained. They'd grab coffee after work. It seemed innocent at first, just casual interactions, right? But something didn't sit right with me. I'd catch her smiling a little too much when she talked about him. I'd notice how she'd mention his name more often than I cared to hear. I tried to tell myself I was just being insecure. She'd never given me a reason not to trust her, right? I mean, Rachel was the kind of woman who'd always been open with me. But as time went on, the distance between us grew. She started texting in the middle of the night, answering calls in whispers. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to see it. But looking back now, all the signs were there. It's like the whole thing was building up right in front of me, and I had refused to notice. There were the late nights, the sudden business trips, the urgent work meetings that always seemed to pop up when I least expected it. Rachel's excuse was always the same. Work was overwhelming, deadlines were tight, and David was just being helpful. I wanted to believe her, but part of me knew. Deep down, I knew. It all came to a head one night when Rachel came home after 11 p.m. She was unusually quiet. Her eyes didn't meet mine as she stepped through the door. I could smell the perfume she always wore, but tonight it was different. There was something off about it. Maybe it was my imagination running wild, but I could smell the faint trace of someone else's cologne, something masculine and distinct. I had asked her where she'd been. She told me she was at the office, but I could tell something was wrong. My pulse was quickening. I wasn't sure what to do with this feeling. So, I asked her point blank, "Have you been with him?" The words were out before I could stop them, and Rachel froze. At first, she denied it. Her voice trembled as she assured me that I was imagining things, that there was nothing between her and David. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But a part of me was starting to crack. The guilt in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze, it all added up in a way that terrified me. The argument escalated from there, but it wasn't one of those fights where either of us got a chance to speak our minds. It was a shouting match, full of blame and accusations. I yelled. She cried. I stormed out. And for the first time in a long time, I slept on the couch. That night marked the turning point for me. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had changed. Maybe it was then that I should have confronted her. Maybe I should have forced the truth out. But I didn't. Instead, I spent the next few months avoiding the inevitable. Rachel and I kept going through the motions, pretending everything was fine, even though nothing felt right. And still, David kept creeping into our lives. I could feel him pulling her further and further away from me, but I didn't know how to stop it. I was losing her, and I couldn't do a damn thing about it. Now, sitting in the kitchen, holding that phone in my hands, the memories all came rushing back. Everything that had led me here. The missed signs, the late nights, the way Rachel had become a stranger to me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room and forget everything. But I couldn't. The truth was too painful to ignore any longer. The phone sat on the table between us like a detonator, waiting to go off. Every time I looked at it, a part of me screamed to just close my eyes, to pretend it wasn't there, to hold on to the last sliver of the life I thought I had. But I couldn't. I couldn't escape what I'd seen, what I knew now. Rachel was standing across the room, wringing her hands together. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. But there was something else there too, something I didn't want to admit. It wasn't just fear. It was guilt. Her guilt. It was written all over her face. She was waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to give her a chance to explain. But I couldn't find the words. I didn't want explanations anymore. I didn't need her to apologize. There was nothing she could say that would make any of this better. I finally looked up at her, my voice hoarse. "How long, Rachel?" I didn't even recognize the sound of my own voice. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. But I had to know. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. It was like she was trying to gather enough courage to face the devastation she had caused. I watched her struggle for a moment, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. She couldn't run from this anymore. I didn't want to hurt you," Rachel finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did." There it was. The apology. The classic line. I shook my head. How long? I repeated, this time louder, more forceful. I needed to know. I needed her to say it. Rachel's hands went to her face, like she was trying to hide from me, from the truth. She had done this to herself. She had built this lie around us, brick by brick, and now the walls were crumbling. Months, she finally confessed, her voice barely audible. It's been going on for months, Alex. Months. Months. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been living in a lie for months, thinking everything was fine, thinking that we were still us. All the late nights, all the little moments that I had convinced myself were nothing more than stress or work pressure. It had all been a cover. Rachel had been sneaking around with David, lying to my face, and I hadn't even seen it. A sickening sense of betrayal washed over me. It wasn't just the affair. It was the fact that she had looked me in the eye every day and acted like everything was fine. She had kissed me goodnight, told me she loved me, and all the while, she was with him. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. I wanted to shout, to scream at her, but I couldn't. There was something else building inside me, something darker, more dangerous. I felt like a fuse had been lit, and it was only a matter of time before it reached the explosion. I couldn't help but think back to all the moments I had missed, all the times I had been blind to what was really happening. My mind raced through the past few months, trying to piece everything together. It was when Rachel first started spending more time at the office. She said it was because of a big project. I bought it. She'd always been a hard worker. I'd even encouraged her to spend more time at work when she said she felt overwhelmed. But now, looking back, I realized how foolish I had been. How desperate I had been to keep things normal, to keep things comfortable. When she'd come home late, I just assumed she was busy with deadlines. I never questioned her. I never even thought to ask. And when she started taking more trips with David, I didn't think anything of it either. They were supposed to be work trips, right? She'd always been professional. He was her coworker, her friend. I had no reason to believe there was anything more. God, I had been so naive, so trusting. I thought I knew my wife, but now it felt like I didn't know her at all. I stared at her now, standing in front of me, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else. But she wasn't the same person anymore. She couldn't be. The woman I had loved was gone. What was left was a stranger, someone who had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even fully comprehend yet. I didn't mean for this to happen, she repeated, her voice soft, almost pleading. But I didn't want her apologies. I didn't care about the reasons. The fact was, she had done it, and nothing she could say would change that. There was a long silence between us, thick and suffocating. Rachel was waiting for me to say something, to make some kind of decision, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I was lost in my own thoughts. The rage, the hurt, the humiliation. It all felt like it was bubbling to the surface, and I couldn't stop it. She stepped closer, her hands reaching out, but I stepped back, shaking my head. Please, Alex, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant for it to go this far. I wasn't thinking. I was just, I don't know. I was confused. I saw the tears welling up in her eyes, and part of me felt a flicker of sympathy. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that it would be okay, that we could work through this. But another part, the part that was raw with anger, wanted to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. I trusted you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I trusted you, Rachel, and you threw it all away. A wave of memories came flooding back, the moments of closeness, the promises we had made to each other, the future we had talked about. It felt like all of that was built on a lie. It felt like nothing was real. I remember the times we had talked about our dreams, our plans. We were supposed to grow old together. We had even joked about which country we would retire to. I could still hear her laugh in my mind when she said she wanted to live by the ocean, surrounded by sunsets. I had promised her I'd make that happen, and now I realized how hollow those promises were. I felt betrayed in ways I didn't even have the words for. The love we had shared felt like a distant memory now, tainted by her lies. David wasn't just some guy she had an affair with. No, he had become the symbol of everything I had lost. Rachel was still standing there, her face full of regret, but I couldn't look at her anymore. I was done listening to her excuses. She had broken something inside me, something I wasn't sure I could ever fix. The rage was bubbling to the surface now. It wasn't a calm, controlled anger. It was primal, untamed. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to make her feel the weight of what she had done to me. And as I stood there, feeling the tension build, I knew there was no turning back. Every part of me was screaming to do something, anything, to release the overwhelming anger that had been simmering inside me. I couldn't just let her stand there, trying to explain herself, pretending that any of this could be fixed. No, this wasn't something that could be fixed with a few words, a half-hearted apology. I had seen the truth, and there was no putting that back in the box. Rachel was still crying, her face twisted in remorse, but I couldn't feel sorry for her anymore. I had spent months living a lie, and now I was the one paying the price. Every moment of my life that I had shared with her, every piece of my heart that I had given her, felt like it had been stolen. She had shattered it all, and the rage I felt wasn't just about her affair. It was about the trust she had torn apart. I could see her trembling now, her hand slowly reaching out toward me, but I took a step back. The coldness in my chest made it hard to even look at her. "Don't touch me," I growled, my voice low and jagged. "I don't want your pity. I don't want your explanations. I want to know why." She took a few shaky steps forward, trying to close the gap between us. "I never meant for it to go this far, Alex. It just happened." Her voice cracked as she said the words, and for a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. She was a woman broken by her own choices, grasping at the last strands of her dignity, trying to make sense of her own mess. But I couldn't afford to feel anything for her. Not anymore. "It just happened?" I scoffed, my voice rising. "Are you telling me that you accidentally fell into his bed? That it was just some mistake?" She flinched as if my words physically struck her, but I didn't care. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she stumbled over her words, trying to make sense of a truth that wasn't her own. "Alex, I didn't want this. I swear to you, I didn't. I was confused. We weren't talking. I needed someone, and he was there for me. But it was never supposed to go this far. It wasn't supposed to." "Stop." I cut her off, my voice sharp and unforgiving. "You think I don't see it? All of it? The late nights, the secret texts, the whispered calls? This wasn't a confusion, Rachel. This was a choice. A conscious choice. And every time you chose him over me, you chose to tear us apart." Her breath hitched, and she took a step back, as if the weight of my words had struck her harder than anything I could have imagined. I could feel it now, the fury that had been building inside me since the moment I first saw those pictures, that undeniable evidence of her infidelity. It was like a fire, an inferno that had been smoldering for months, and now it was finally consuming me. I didn't care anymore. The pieces were falling into place, and I wasn't going to let her pretend like this wasn't the inevitable conclusion. She had crossed a line, and now I had to decide how to deal with it. Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke again, but there was something in the way she spoke now that told me she was starting to understand. "Please, Alex. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." I was done hearing apologies. They meant nothing. Words were empty when the actions behind them were laced with lies. She had already proven herself unworthy of anything I had given her, and I had nothing left to offer her but the bitter taste of regret. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Rachel. It doesn't make it better. It never will." My voice was a low growl now, a dangerous rasp that felt foreign in my throat. "You're not sorry for me. You're sorry for yourself. You're sorry because you got caught." Her face turned pale at the accusation, but she didn't say anything. She didn't try to defend herself. "I trusted you. I gave you everything," I continued, my eyes locking with hers. "But now you're nothing but a stranger to me. Do you understand that?" Her lips trembled as she nodded, but her tears only angered me more. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me. I wasn't going to let her emotional manipulation control the situation anymore. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, And for the first time since I discovered what Rachel had done, I felt something inside me click. It was a decision, a moment of clarity, a moment where I realized I had nothing left to lose. I couldn't keep living this lie. I couldn't keep pretending that I was the same person who had once loved her, trusted her with every piece of my soul. That person was gone now. The man standing in front of her was someone else, someone who had been betrayed and broken. I couldn't go back. There was no turning back from this. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. Not with her tears, not with her soft voice, not with the desperation in her eyes. She had made her bed, and now it was time for her to lie in it. I took a long, steadying breath before I spoke again, my voice a razor-sharp whisper. "You want to know what the worst part is?" I asked, staring directly at her. "It's that I thought you were different. I thought you were better than this, but you're not. You're just like every other selfish person who only thinks about themselves. You don't deserve me, Rachel. Not anymore." For a long moment, Rachel stood there, frozen, her entire body shaking. I could see her trying to process my words, trying to understand the finality in them. But it was too late for her. The damage had been done, and there was no coming back from it. Not this time. And in that moment, I felt something cold and dark settle deep within me. A part of me had been shattered by her actions, but another part, the part that had been buried beneath all the hurt and disappointment, began to awaken. I had been pushed to the edge, and now I was standing there, fully aware of the person I had become. "Get out," I said, the words slipping past my lips with deadly calm. "Get out of my house." Her face crumpled at the finality of it all, but she didn't fight me. She didn't say anything more. Slowly, she turned, gathering her things, her body trembling with every movement. She didn't even try to convince me to forgive her. She knew, just as I did, that the damage was irreversible. As I watched her leave, a twisted sense of satisfaction filled me. It wasn't the satisfaction of victory. No, it was the satisfaction of knowing I had made the choice. I had taken control back from her. The door clicked shut behind her, and the house fell silent. I stood there, taking in the weight of everything that had just transpired. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe it was minutes. Maybe it was hours. The adrenaline, the anger, the overwhelming flood of emotions. It was all too much. But in that silence, after Rachel was gone, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It was strange, almost surreal. Here I was, standing alone in my own home. My life turned upside down, and yet, for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The storm inside me was far from over, but the calm after the chaos, it was mine. For the first time in days, maybe even weeks, I didn't feel like I was losing control. The decisions I had made had finally set me free. At least, that's what I tried to tell myself. But the reality of it? The harsh truth? It was just the beginning of something much darker. Rachel was gone. The house, empty. The silence. It wasn't peaceful, though. It was suffocating. I didn't want to feel the weight of my actions, but I couldn't escape it. My mind raced as I replayed the confrontation over and over again, the cold finality of my words echoing in my head. Get out. I couldn't believe I had said it like that, so calmly, so decisively. I had kicked her out, forced her to leave the home we had shared, the life we had built together. I had done it to protect myself, to ensure that she couldn't come back, that she couldn't worm her way back into my life with more lies and manipulation. But deep down, I knew there was no coming back for me, either. The anger, the betrayal, it still clawed at me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. But I had made a decision. I had chosen myself for the first time in a long time. And as much as I tried to convince myself that it was the right thing to do, there was a hollow feeling in my chest. The revenge, the payback I thought would make me feel better. It hadn't. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty space where Rachel had once been. The furniture felt colder without her presence, the room emptier. The whole house felt like a monument to the broken parts of my life that I couldn't fix. I had sought vengeance. I had hoped it would cleanse me, give me a sense of justice. But instead, it left me with this empty ache, like a wound that was still fresh, even if it was already healing. What now? What was I supposed to do with all the rage I had unleashed? What was the point of all this anger, this pain, if there was no real victory in it? The question haunted me in the days that followed. I could feel the consequences of what I had done creeping up on me. It wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It wasn't even about the affair anymore. It was about the person I had become in the aftermath. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I had let my need for vengeance, my desire to make her feel the pain I was feeling, take over, and now I had to live with it. People around me started to notice the change. Friends who had been so quick to offer sympathy when they heard about Rachel's betrayal were now looking at me differently. They said the right things. You're better off without her. You'll find someone who deserves you. But I could hear the tone in their voices. I could feel the judgment, the way they couldn't quite look me in the eye. They didn't understand. I didn't understand either. What had I really gained from this? Rachel was gone, yes, but I was left standing in the wreckage of my own making. My heart, which had once been full of love and trust, now felt like it had been hollowed out. There was a void inside me that I couldn't fill with anything but regret. A few days passed before I had to see her again. She texted me once, just once, to ask if we could talk. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to ignore her completely, to keep her out of my life forever. But the other part of me, the part that was still human, still connected to the woman I had loved, wanted answers. I agreed to meet her, and I wasn't sure what I expected. I wasn't sure if I wanted closure or just to hear her beg for forgiveness. But when I saw her standing there in front of the cafe, her face pale and drawn, I realized I didn't want either. Not anymore. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. The woman who had once seemed so confident, so in control, now looked like a ghost of herself. She had lost her spark, and there was no joy in her face. No happiness, no hope, only regret. I didn't think you'd actually agree to meet, Rachel said softly, her voice hollow. But thank you. I needed to see you. To apologize. I felt nothing as I looked at her. No anger. No sadness. Just an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I don't want your apologies, I said, cutting her off before she could go any further. I'm not sure what you expect me to say, Rachel. There's nothing left to fix. She swallowed hard, her eyes welling up once again. I'm sorry, Alex. I've always been sorry. I've never stopped being sorry. I was just weak. I was lost, and I took the easy way out. And now, I don't know what to do. I shook my head, the numbness settling deeper inside me. You should have thought about that before you decided to betray me, before you chose him over me. Her lips trembled as she took a step back, her shoulders shaking. For the first time since the affair had been revealed, I felt like the one in control. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't vengeful. I was done. I want you to leave, I said quietly, the finality in my words hitting her like a slap. Just go. I didn't feel bad saying it. I didn't feel sorry for her. I was finally free, but it didn't feel like I thought it would. I watched her walk away, her figure becoming smaller and smaller as she disappeared into the crowd, but I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel justice. What I felt was the crushing weight of something else. The same emptiness that had been haunting me since the moment she left my life. Revenge had promised me a sense of closure, but instead, all I had was this hollow ache, this quiet realization that no amount of punishment could ever make me feel better. I had burned the bridges. I had torn everything down in my path, and for what? The fallout was inevitable. Revenge never leads to peace. It's a lie we tell ourselves when we're hurting, when we need to justify the pain we inflict on others. But in the end, the only person we hurt is ourselves. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I'd ever find my way back to the man I was before this whole nightmare began. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep punishing myself. I had to find a way to move forward, to find a life beyond this dark chapter. It wasn't going to be easy. There were days when the weight of what had happened seemed unbearable, like the past would reach out and drag me back into its depths, pulling me under once more. But something inside me shifted. For the first time in months, I could see a flicker of light, a spark that told me there was more ahead for me. The early morning sun broke through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. I sat at the kitchen table, the familiar cup of coffee in my hands. But this time it felt different. The aroma wasn't a reminder of the routines I'd shared with Rachel, but a symbol of something new, something mine. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the moment sink in, trying to hold on to the peace I was beginning to feel. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked into that storm. I had spent so much time angry, hurting, desperate to make sense of everything that had gone wrong. But the longer I sat with it, the clearer it became. Holding on to that pain, letting it control me, wasn't going to bring me peace. Revenge hadn't healed me. It hadn't fixed anything. In fact, it had only deepened the wound. I needed to focus on healing, on letting go of what I couldn't change. I needed to stop chasing something that had already slipped through my fingers. But it wasn't going to happen overnight, and I wasn't naive enough to think that time alone would fix everything. It was going to take work. It was going to take real change. The hardest part, I realized, wasn't accepting what Rachel had done to me. It was accepting my own role in everything that had unfolded. I had let my emotions rule me. I had allowed my pain to become my identity. I had built walls so high that I couldn't even see the way out. I started small, simple things. I began setting goals for myself again. Things that mattered to me, not things that revolved around the life I had with Rachel. I didn't need to go back to the person I was before the betrayal. I needed to find out who I could be now. I signed up for a class I had always wanted to take, something that had been a distant dream for me before. I started running again, something I had abandoned years ago. I began reaching out to old friends I had lost touch with, reconnecting with people who reminded me of who I was before everything changed. The old me, before the affair, before the revenge, before the pain. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others. There were still moments when I felt the sting of everything I had been through. But with each step I took, I felt a little bit stronger, a little bit more sure of myself, and eventually, those steps led me somewhere new, somewhere better. I had no illusions. I knew I couldn't forget what happened. I couldn't erase the betrayal that had shattered me, or the choices I had made in the aftermath. But I could forgive myself. I could choose to not let the past control my future. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect, but it was going to be mine. Rachel had already made her choice. She had already walked away, and that was her right. But I had a choice too. I didn't need to keep living in the shadow of what had been taken from me. I didn't need to stay stuck in the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. I looked at my reflection in the mirror one morning and saw someone different, someone who wasn't broken, someone who had survived. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled at that person, not because I was happy with everything that had happened, but because I had made it through. I had found my way to the other side. It was a few months later when I met her. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't in a rush to fill the void Rachel had left. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Her name was Jenna. We met at a coffee shop, of all places. I noticed her immediately, sitting at a corner table, lost in a book. Her laugh was infectious, and there was something about the way she carried herself that felt different. She wasn't trying to be anything she wasn't. She wasn't carrying any emotional baggage that wasn't her own. It was refreshing. We talked for hours that day, and over the following weeks, we continued to meet up. At first, I kept things slow, careful not to rush into anything. I didn't want to make the same mistakes. But with Jenna, there was no pressure. There was no urgency to get things right. There was just a connection, one that felt easy and natural. I wasn't ready to put my heart on the line again. I knew that. But with Jenna, I didn't feel the need to rush. I didn't feel like I was trying to fill a void. She made me feel seen again, in a way I hadn't felt in years. And that alone was enough to remind me that I could still trust, still hope. When I think about what I went through, when I think about the betrayal, the anger, and the revenge, I realize something important. It wasn't the situation that defined me. It wasn't the choices Rachel made or the mistakes I had made in response. It was how I chose to move forward that mattered. In the end, it wasn't about finding justice. It wasn't about getting even. It was about rediscovering myself, about understanding that I was worth more than the pain I had allowed to define me. The past still has a way of showing up when I least expect it. There are moments when I remember the hurt, when I remember the chaos, and I feel that old rage try to creep back in. But now, I know better. I know that peace comes from within. And while I can't change what happened, I can control where I go from here. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have something to look forward to. A future that's mine. A future that's full of possibility, of growth, of hope. And that's enough. As I sat on my balcony, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The pain wasn't gone, not completely, but it didn't own me anymore. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I wasn't consumed by the past. I was free. I had let it go. Tomorrow, I would wake up, step into the world, and live my life. Not as the man I had been before Rachel, and not as the man who had sought revenge, but as someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned the hard way but had finally found his way back to peace. And that was all I could ever ask for. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next gripping tale. Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. Until next time.